Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe. I hope all of you had a happy and peaceful Easter, but we can't, unfortunately, say that that was the case in the Middle East, where the Easter weekend saw a great deal of turbulence, particularly in Jerusalem, with clashes once again between Palestinians and Israelis, and several shootings taking place with tragic killings on both sides. And this reminds us that although the attention over recent months may have been on Ukraine or on the situation with China and Taiwan, the Middle East has this sort of nasty habit of always sort of imposing itself on our agenda, as if to say, please don't forget about me. And that's because in the Middle East, things have a habit of suddenly turning bad, but also suddenly turning good. There are always risks and opportunities in a fast-moving situation with a capacity for surprise. It reminds me of that American Western, the good, the bad, and the ugly. On the good side, or at least the more positive side, we have had in recent days the normalisation of relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the biggest Sunni state and the largest Shea power in the region, brokered by Beijing. We've had also some spectacular progress in Yemen, the world's worst humanitarian crisis, where the Saudis, encouraged by Oman, which has been playing the role of the mediator, have finally agreed to sit down with their adversary, the Houthis, in Yemen, sponsored by Iran, to talk about a real political settlement. That would involve a 6-month ceasefire. That would involve the Saudis lifting their embargo on ports like Hodeida to allow humanitarian supplies to be delivered, allowing Yemen to resume oil exports to earn some much-needed hard currency as well, and the release of prisoners by both sides. It's not yet peace in Yemen, but the UN Special Representative for Yemen, Hans Grundberg, has said that it's our best opportunity to move forward in several years. We've also seen in Syria some spectacular developments when it comes to Assad, the leader of Syria, being allowed back into the Arab community. There's going to be a meeting in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, on Friday of the Arab League foreign ministers to discuss allowing Syria back into the Arab League since its expulsion at the beginning of the conflict in Syria back in 2011. I'm not saying so much that this is good, because we would have once hoped that Assad would have fallen from power because of the brutal way that he's repressed his civilian population. But it certainly shows that Arab states are not waiting for the international community to act, but increasingly are taking matters into their own hands. There's also been, it has to be said, the worsening of relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia, with the Saudis constantly refusing the Biden administration's entreaties to ramp up oil production to stabilize the price of the barrel. The Saudis have gone in the other direction with Russia, which is to decrease production to bring the price back to $85 a barrel. But the bad and ugly side, certainly as we discovered last weekend, is with the situation in Israel and between Israel and its immediate neighbors. The big demonstrations that we've never seen before in Israel against the government plans to curb the powers of the Israeli Supreme Court. And of course, on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the Israeli police intervening in the sacred Al-Aqsa mosque, with Palestinians barricading themselves in, the increase in tensions with missiles being fired into Israel from Lebanon and from Syria for for the first time in many years, and the Israelis responding by attacking also for the first time since 2006 targets inside Lebanon and more recently Syria, shutting down the airports of Damascus and Aleppo. This is the ugly part of the equation, with the risk of a wider regional conflict breaking out. So what are we going to do about all of this? Well, first of all, we need to prevail upon the Israeli government to work for calm. Some Israeli ministers have made quite explosive situations in recent weeks, for example, calling for blockading the access of Muslims to Al-Aqsa or to erase whole Palestinian villages. The international community has to react very, very sharply to those statements and prevail upon Prime Minister Netanyahu to work for calm, both in the security situation and in terms of withdrawing these controversial laws to curb the powers of the Supreme Court. Secondly, we need to work much closer with countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which were once very much allies of the West. Saudi Arabia, for example, is a large purchaser of American arms, but which have been gravitating recently more towards China and towards Russia. The UAE, for example, has been accused of violating the sanctions against Russia. The third thing is that we need to deter Iran, which probably feels emboldened by the current situation, its normalisation of diplomatic relations with the Saudis, the fact that Russia has been buying lots of Saudi drones and missile components. And it's good, for example, that this week the United States has put a guided missile destroyer once again into the Gulf as a deterrent signal to Iran not to try to escalate the current situation. It's going to be important that we work with Israel and Palestine to get the Middle East peace process back on track. The Biden administration has not shown much interest in doing this, thinking that previous administrations tried very, very hard, but didn't really succeed. So why waste time and effort? But we know that there is only one solution, which is the two-state solution in the Middle East. And as frustrating as it is, the Americans and the Europeans have to put their shoulders to the wheel and get back into doing that. But one precondition would be the organization of elections in the Palestinian areas. Those elections have not been held for the last 10 years. They're now badly needed to once again elect a legitimate Palestinian authority. So the Middle East is shifting very, very fast. If we don't act, other players like Russia, Iran, and China will take advantage of the situation. We cannot afford a violent explosion in the region. There's much to play for. And so, although, yes, it is tempting to focus on Iran, or on Ukraine, and on the situation around Taiwan at the moment, as the mafia boss Michael Corleone says in Godfather 2, every time I leave the mafia, it sticks out its hand and grips me. The Middle East has the habit of doing the same with us. So let's grip the Middle East before the Middle East grips us. Thank you for watching today. Look forward to engaging with you as always next week.